What's up, guys? I'm gonna be showing you how I master. Now, there's a billion ways to master. Everyone does it differently. Everyone has different, like a different thought process, more or less. But this is just how I do it. And first step is do not move on to the master until you are happy with your mix, or else you're just gonna be chasing your tail, going back and forth, fixing things, and it's just going to get really confusing. So definitely don't move on until you're happy with your mix. Another thing I like to do, and I think this is really effective, is take a break between mixing and mastering. When you're happy with your mix, take a break, and then maybe after an hour or so, come back to the mix, listen to it one last time, make sure it's cool, fix any small things, and then move on to the master. Um, All right, so let's get started. What I have going on here is I like to master in the same session that I'm mixing in because sometimes when you compress things, the ratios of instruments, like the blends, will slightly change. You'll see what I'm talking about. For example, if like on a hook or something, maybe a snare will get a little drowned out, so I'll just go automate it up slightly. But sometimes it doesn't happen. Usually it doesn't happen, but I like to do it in the same session just to be safe. So I'm gonna be mastering on this track right here. So every single track is going through this one, and then this one is being sent to record so that you can hear what I'm doing, and then it's just being routed straight out through the master. So this is like a copy of this being sent to what you're hearing right now. And the first thing I have on here is just a trim. I'm gonna just make everything a little quieter, just to give me some more headroom for compression. So, yeah, like I said, all this is doing is turning down everything by 4.6 dB. This can be different every time. I like to have it pretty quiet for the master. All right, so the first thing I'll do is I'll throw on a compressor, and I just love the SSL compressor because it's so subtle. And what I'm thinking about with this compressor is just like a master bus compressor type thing, just to kind of glue everything together. And I like it really subtle, so I'll have it on the 10 millisecond attack and auto release, and I like no more than -4 of gain reduction. Let's get that sounding good. All right, that's cool. That's cool. Might come back to that a little later, but we'll just have to see. Next thing I like to do is I'll throw on another compressor. It's the same thing, but this time I'm gonna be listening for something different. This is gonna be kind of taming the peaks that jump out over the mix. So it's usually gonna be like snare or kick or something like that. And I just want a little tiny bit of gain reduction on this. If you compress the whole mix too much, it's going to be really noticeable, and you don't want that. We just want to kind of tame those peaks and things that jump out. And you don't have to use the SSL compressor. I just really like this one. Feel free to just experiment with other ones. Another one that's really good is the FabFilter Pro C. And I'm sure there's a lot more out there, but I'll show you what I'm talking about with this one. This one is very, very subtle, and just to tame the peaks. All right, cool. And like I said, this one, it turns out, is the snare. The snare is what's popping out. So it's just kind of taming the snare transient a little bit. I feel like it's doing a good job too. It sounds pretty good. All right, so the next thing I'm gonna do is throw on a multi-band compressor. Um, there's a lot of ways to do this. A lot of different compressors. You got C4, C6. You've got the FabFilter Pro MB that also sounds good. But I'm gonna use this one, just because I found a preset I like. And this, you can totally screw over your mix with this. So you're gonna have to be careful, and you're gonna have to just really listen to what you're doing. Um, but I'm gonna find I like this preset here, even though I do not like these gain presets. I'm not crazy about that. I'm gonna start with it flat, but I like where the bands are. So we have like the low band, it's below 64, and then the next one ends at about, what is that? Um, Man, I don't know. It's about 300 maybe, about 300. And then the next one we have up about 10K. So this is where I like my bands to be. Um, so what I'm gonna be listening for is I don't want to be compressing too much. You're probably gonna have a little bit more compression around here just because there's a lot of mid-range things like guitars, and usually you'll have vocals, so there's gonna be a lot more gain reduction potentially here. So you're gonna have to listen for this band a lot. You're gonna have to listen for this band a lot for the low end because you don't want too quick of an attack, or you're gonna choke off the transients. Even though that goes for pretty much everything, but just listen for what you like and you don't like, and adjust accordingly. So I'm gonna start with this and kind of adjust, and then I'll explain what I did. Cool, that sounds pretty good. Oops. And what I did essentially was, I mean, I didn't do that much. I just boosted this band a little bit just because I wanted a little bit more out of the guitars, since this is where they're gonna sit. Then I boosted some of the high end. Everything else sounded pretty good. I think I turned threshold down, which is this knob right here. I turned the threshold down on the low end. This would be compressing a little tiny bit more, get a little bit more consistency out of it. But yeah, this is something you're gonna want to play around with, and definitely before you add another plugin to these steps, just make sure it sounds pretty good with the one that's like the latest one, like C4 in this case. All right, so I got to sound good with C4. I'm gonna throw on. I really like this plugin right here, Virtual Mix Rack. And there's a free plugin that I'm going to be using that sounds amazing. It's called Revival. And I'll show you what it is. It's kind of like the secret sauce. All right, so I'm going to load up Revival. All right, so this is really easy and simple. So what this is, you have a shimmer knob, you have a thickness knob, and they do pretty much exactly what you think they do. This one kind of adds some really nice presency harmonics to the high end, and this is going to add some low end. But it's not really muddy. I don't know how they do this, but it's really nice. It's a really nice low end. But with all of that said, you do not want to overdo this. I have definitely been guilty of this in the past, overdoing the thickness. You have to ask yourself beforehand, do I need more low end, or is it good how it is? And you can at least listen to it, but you're gonna have to be able to judge whether or not it needs it. So I'm gonna use some shimmer first. I'm gonna start with the shimmer. And what I think this is, it kind of like takes a blanket off of your mix and makes it sound more three-dimensional, makes things more in your face. I'll just show you what it sounds like. So you probably hear like the top end, the snare, and the cymbals. And if I had vocals, you'd be able to hear like the high end of the vocals, the presence really come through. It's a really cool effect. I'm gonna go and do the thickness now. I'm just gonna add a little bit because I feel like the snare really, I mean the kick really has some nice low end going to it. Um, yeah, let's move on to the next thing. The next thing I have is a clipper. And what this does, it's kind of like a limiter, but instead of just squashing down the peaks, it just cuts them off. So what this means to us is that instead of getting rid of and squashing down the transients, it's kind of like gonna push them through. So it's kind of like a limiter that doesn't get rid of the drum transients and stuff. All right, so for the clipper, I like to start out with a 50% on the mix knob. So you're getting half the signal before, and half the signal is going to be after the clipper. So you have the dynamics of before, and then you're going to have like the clipped signal after. It's going to add some punchiness. Let me turn down the trim so we have some headroom after. And something to listen for here is you want to make sure you're not pushing too hard, so it's just not like everything is just slamming. And you also don't want it to distort, because if you push it too hard, it'll distort. So just want to find a nice medium for that. Cool, that sounds good to me. Let's move on to the next one. I'm gonna throw an EQ on here, and I'm gonna do that filter thing I always do. It's gonna be a really steep high pass at 30 hertz or whatever, depending on the genre. I like to have mine at 30 hertz, but maybe you have a dance track with like crazy low, and maybe you don't want to do this. But for most things, even rap, I like to do this. Just cleans the low end up a lot. And if you haven't been doing this the whole mix, like on guitars and drums and so on, if you haven't been doing this, it's probably a good thing to throw an EQ on your mastering chain as the first insert. You just constantly want to be doing this. I'll show you how this will clean up your low end in a second. So this is always good to have here. And then this is where you kind of want to fine tune your mix to your liking. You want to listen for some things you don't like. Listen for some resonating frequencies. I always check the 4 to 5K because that's always harsh. And just fine tune things to your liking. Cool, that sounds good. The presence on guitar sounds good. What I'm actually gonna do, and this is the benefit of mastering in your mixing session, is I can go back here. I'm gonna turn the guitars up a little tiny bit. Cool, that sounds pretty good. You can always go back to the EQ later. But the last thing in the chain that's gonna be doing any processing is gonna be a limiter. This is something that frustrated me for a very long time. Finding a good mastering limiter. This is the best one I've ever heard. It's FabFilter Pro L. It's amazing. It's so transparent, and you can get so much gain reduction and still not really hear it, more or less. It just sounds amazing, and you have so much flexibility with it. You can dither in it. Um, you have different styles. Look ahead, time, attack, and release, and you can control transients, which is really cool. Before I go any farther, dithering, put it into simple terms. When you bounce a track out and it's in one bit depth and it goes to another bit depth, there can be some distortion problems. And you can fix this with something called dithering. So if you're going to be bouncing it to 16-bit and you're recording in 24-bit, setting this to 16-bit is going to add a little bit of noise that, when bounced, gets rid of that distortion problem that I was talking about. So I always say this is 16-bit because that's CD quality, 44.1, 16-bit. And yeah, this plugin has it all. I'll set this to minus 0.1 because sometimes it'll clip on some playback things, like some PAs maybe will clip this, or maybe Final Cut I think will clip if you leave it too hot. But yeah, I always do minus 0.1 just to be safe. And then you can just start boosting it. And if you don't like how it sounds, if you think some things are being squashed out, or you feel like the transients are being squashed out, you can just go mess with these settings right here. So I'm just gonna use this, and I'm gonna try to get a good sound with the limiter. Be warned, it's gonna get loud here. Cool. I think I hear like a little bit too much of that low end of that kick, so I'm gonna cut that out a little bit. Cool. It turned out what that was I need to cut a little bit more of that 150 that I don't like in kicks. It kind of just came through a little more when I was mastering. So I just went up there, and instead of cutting this right here, I can just cut it from the kick, so I'm not cutting this from everything. Cool, and the last thing I'll throw on just to check is has frequency. What this is a frequency analyzer, and it's got peak and RMS meters, which is good. So you want to be looking at both. So the first thing I'm going to look at is going to be the frequency analyzer. There's a certain shape you want to achieve. You kind of want the low end to peak around 100 hertz, and then kind of drop off ever so slightly until about 4K. So I'm not talking about a lot, but slightly less than straight across. So like just barely dropping off, and at 4K it drops off. So let's see how ours is looking. Cool, it's looking good. There's a little much around 200 maybe. It's kind of coming back up there. However, if there were vocals in this track, there would be a lot more around 1K to kind of smooth this little transition out. So I think for this purpose, this is fine how it is. And another thing to look for, so we've been doing all this high pass filtering. So why have we been doing that? It's for this right here. If this line was like way up here, which it is a lot of the time, I've listened to a lot of mixes, and there's this DC offset up here. There's this massive amount of sub, and when this is going through the limiter, it's going to be amplified, and it's going to be taking up a lot of space. So you definitely don't want this. If you take it out or if you filter it, it'll definitely clean up the low end. This really goes a long way. Notice how this line was staying right up here, but there's still a little slope going up. That's good. That's good. This is always going to be here, but you want to get rid of it as best you can. And what you can do to combat this is just this is really strange looking, but just stack these filters, like the same exact ones, and it'll press that low DC offset. It'll press it down even lower. Cool, I'm just doing some last little EQing. I hear some stuff on the low end. It's kind of sticking out. I'm gonna get rid of. Cool, that sounds pretty good. And this is something when you get to this stage, you're going to be kind of adjusting a few things. So what I've been adjusting, I've been looking at this little RMS meter right here. And what you want to be looking for when it comes to this is how loud it is. This is perceived loudness. So -12 to me is the minimum you want for a master. It's a very dynamic master. Some pop ones and rap ones will get up to like -9 or a -6 even. That's stupid to me, but that's just my opinion. It's totally my opinion. I prefer to have a more dynamic sounding mix, which is going to be around -12. So that's what I would shoot for when it comes to loudness. But yeah, that's about all I do to master. It's relatively simple. I'm sure there's simpler chains that people will do. But yeah, I kind of went through this one a little quick. Typically, I'll spend more time on each and just get it to sound exactly how I want it before I go on to the next plugin. I'll spend a little bit more time. But this is what I use in the order of how I use them. And yeah, the last thing I would say is once you have everything sounding good, just make sure you're going back and playing through your mix and you're listening for inconsistencies like snares being too quiet, or maybe on guitar heavy and vocal heavy parts, one will drown the other out and you'll have to automate. But yeah, having a good taste with automation will go a long way with your mastering. Another thing I would say is automating these right here can be pretty cool. So you can go through and you can automate, say, the makeup gain of this compressor. Maybe there's a quiet part in the song you want to be a little more dynamic. You can just automate the output gain to be quieter on the section, and then automate to get louder as the song crescendos or gets louder. But yeah, that's about all I do. It's pretty simple. And let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'll definitely try to answer anything you send at me.